I get to turn the tables on you, my friend. How are you doing?
Kash, I'm fantastic. It's so great to be here.
It's really a treat to have you on. It's really a treat for our viewership in the War Room Posse to mix and collaborate with the Epoch Times, which is one of the largest print circulations, and their digital program is a monster in over 40 countries. Jan, I know you guys have a motto, truth and tradition. I'm a big part of it over there. I love what you do, and I know you have some serious topics to discuss. I saw what you're doing and your brilliant interview on the CCP's organ harvesting machine and how grotesque and disgusting that is and how it's far-reaching and how it has national security implications. Can you give us a little bit of an outline about what you dove into with your guest and what are the next steps?
100%. I mean, just for starters, right? The guest, David Matas, international human rights lawyer, he first established that this was really happening back in 2006 with a massive report. He estimates that China's forced organ harvesting industry amounts to about $9 billion a year, okay? And this is something I'm going to talk about that is frankly hard to believe, right? It's hard to believe. There's actually a survivor. I never thought we'd see one. I've been covering this issue for 18 years now. And there's a guy who has a giant 14-inch scar on his right side. And he is basically missing part of his liver and part of his lung. The liver has since regenerated. And the even crazier part is that attempting to discredit him, the Chinese regime has admitted to operating on him without consent. So finally, there is the smoking gun that people have been looking for that's been so difficult. I mean, this thing has been litigated so much. There's a whole China tribunal that took a year to establish all the evidence around this. It's incontrovertible. But finally, there is a guy who, by the way, Assistant Secretary of State Bob Destro managed to rescue to America, like a big task back during the Trump administration. And he's finally come out to tell his story.
That's unbelievable breakthrough reporting. I hope everybody goes and watches your interview, Jan. And for those that haven't been following as closely as you have, as closely as Epoch has, and as closely as the War Room Posse has, how can you, the breakthrough is monumental, but the breakthrough only happened because there were so many other tens of thousands of people who were treated grotesquely, criminally as victims by the CCP. Are you able to quantify the types and numbers of organ harvesting and the reach that the CCP had internationally?
It's very difficult. One of the reasons we first discovered this was that Chinese hospitals were advertising basically in American newspapers saying you can get a new heart in a week if you have a few $100,000 to spend. Like that kind of stuff isn't possible in an ethical way. And you can schedule it so you know when someone's going to die. This was 18 years ago. In terms of the numbers, it's very, very difficult to quantify. And I don't like to, give numbers when I don't really know. But we do know that basically, it's about 60 to 100,000 organ transplants a year since the early 2000s. And we know that there really is no credible organ donor source. Back in 2015, they said they outlawed taking them from prisoners. But later, there was a paper that was done that showed that the growth curve of their so-called official transplant statistic was a perfect quadratic equation. So in other words, they used fake data to pretend that they actually had organ donors. And Chinese generally don't like to give organs. It's a kind of a cultural thing. And then this is the craziest part. So the implication, you asked about that early on, national security and otherwise. By ignoring this for so many years on the Falun Gong, they built their whole organ transplant industry, in my view, on the Falun Gong. That then transferred over to the Uyghurs later in a isolated community where it's even easier to perpetrate these atrocities. And there's millions of people in these concentration camps. So and the effect is, right, that all these doctors in China, in effect, and all these doctors are doing research, medical research with Americans, with other doctors around the world. There's all sorts of collaborations. They basically become murderers, the ones who participate in this. And there's even a paper that shows that there's at least 72 transplants that have been done in the published literature globally by Chinese surgeons where the cause of death was transplantation. And they didn't even realize it because it's become such a normal thing that they didn't even realize they had written into the scientific method.
That's criminal on so many scales. not just the organ harvesting itself. But I'd like to highlight, and maybe you can talk about, I'm going to try my best at a Jan Jekielek segue into my next topic with you, all things CCP. But you mentioned that they have to find these people, and they use data to collect numbers and information and the whereabouts of these people and what they have and what they need. Now, that infiltration by the CCP, I got to believe, isn't just done on mainland China. I know they're doing it domestically. And as we get into an election year here, an election debate here tonight, I believe one of the hot topics is going to be the CCP. How has the CCP used its community outside of mainland China, putting aside the atrocities against the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong and the actual modern-day genocide and forced labor? That's disgusting in and of itself. Then you have organ harvesting. Then you have a cyber offensive operation, in my opinion, downrange, for the CCP to fund and fuel this monster. What are some companies out there in CCP land that are impacting America? I know TikTok's a popular one. I've heard of a couple of others, but do you have some? And what are your thoughts on this? And how does it connect back to the main event here?
Well, let me just comment briefly on China's influence operations, okay? In terms of funding, right, the second largest, let's call it a ministry in China, in terms of funding, is something called the United Front Work Department. And the whole purpose, essentially, of the United Front Work Department is influence, is to across the world, with the U.S. being the prime focus that the Chinese regime views as its prime enemy, and is waging a people's war in the words of the dictator there, Xi Jinping. So my point is, it's an incredibly important part of their efforts is to push their influence. And then, of course, we have this, senior aide, deputy chief of staff of Kathy Hochul that's now been indicted on basically all sorts of fascinating things. But the biggest thing that they did, and you mentioned the communities, right? What is the impact in the community? The impact is that these CCP agents of influence, they pretend like they actually represent the Chinese communities in America. And of course they don't, right? And in fact, not at all. In fact, a lot of the communities have very different perspectives, right? But the effect is that American officials might actually believe the CCP line, because they basically it makes it so that the voices of the dissidents can't be heard. In terms of companies, Kash, you're asking about, of course, I've talked a lot about TikTok. TikTok is both an information gathering operation, huge intelligence gathering, but also influence, right? The ability to control the algorithm, the ability to push whatever narratives the CCP is interested, whether they're chaotic or whatever, into the American population massively, right? Over 100 million users. So another one is, of course, Temu. And Kash, you've written quite extensively on Temu, I've seen. And Temu, I mean, a lot of based on the assessments and what this app actually does, it sort of masquerades as a super cheap shopping app. But what the CCP does is they kind of, subsidize things like this, when this app, from some estimates that I've seen, basically has full access to your phone, basically gathers absolutely everything it can, right?
Wow. No, sorry. I didn't even know that. So it's basically almost like you're in a Marvel movie and they drop an app in and they just basically take over your phone. With what Temu and PDD are doing. Well, is that it?
I don't think from what I understand, okay, and this is secondhand. I haven't done this research myself, okay,
sure.
But
Understood.
The level of access to your information is unprecedented for an app which really is just pretending to be a shopping app. Okay. And in terms of command and control, you're complete control. I'm not aware of that part, but just the intelligence gathering element itself is unparalleled.
So, Jan, in your opinion, and you are one of the foremost experts on all things the CCP is doing to destroy our world. Now you've talked about Uyghur genocide, Falun Gong genocide. Now you're talking about organ harvesting. Now you're talking about offensive cyber operations into outside of mainland China, into the United States of America during an election cycle. We've got a couple of minutes left. If you were talking to the American public, which you are, what would you say would be on the horizon that we must watch out for and we must protect against, especially on the eve of a presidential debate where national security is such a hot topic?
I would say this, okay? So the CCP is the master of misdirection. One of the bits of traditional Chinese culture that they didn't destroy during the Cultural Revolution was the war fighting methods, right? Sun Tzu, Art of War, and actually many more. And so a lot of this has to do with making sure that America is incredibly distracted. Right, there's a war in Russia, there's a war in Israel, there's all sorts of things going on that the CCP supports. Okay, and we know that they materially support both Russia and the Palestinians at the moment. We know that's real. I'm giving an example as to why would they be doing this. Right? Why would they be doing this? Because they don't want the U.S. to really focus where the true threat is, where the true existential threat to America is, which is the Chinese Communist Party. So I think that's the key thing that we need to understand.
I think you're one of the brightest minds that has been highlighting that for so long, and I'm so glad that so many people are turning to Epoch and the War Room Posse. I will, of course, advertise and campaign for everybody in the War Room Posse to sign up for an Epoch digital and online subscription and print subscription. But Jan has a wonderful show called American Thought Leaders on Epoch. Jan, where can folks find you? Where can they watch the show? And where can they follow you on social media to get updates on everything you're doing and Epoch's doing?
On social media, you'll have to go to @Jan Jekielek, but I don't know who can spell that. So, Kash, perhaps you'll have to put it up later.
It's on the screen. We got you covered.
Come to theepochtimes.com. By the way, I'm on Truth and Twitter at Jan Jekielek, but also theepochtimes.com, and look for American Thought Leaders.